समझ अपनी भाषा में ही आता है, कंटेंट आपकी भाषा में ओनली ऑन डेली हंट। हमें पता है आपको क्या चाहिए, अपनी पसंद का कंटेंट ओनली ऑन डेली हंट। रखो अपने एरिया की खबर, लोकल अपडेट्स ओनली ऑन डेली हंट।
Welcome back to the Darbar Hall in Diggi Palace at the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol. Today we present Sahir LUDHIANVI, A Life in Poetry. Nasreen Munni Kabir in conversation with Saif Mahmood. Poet and lyricist Sahir LUDHIANVI's work has inspired generations of readers, shaping popular culture as we know it. A fiercely humanistic poet, his evocative words have spanned across literary and thematic boundaries of romance, revolution and patriotism. Writer and filmmaker Nasreen Munni Kabir's recent In the Year of Sahir is a grand tribute to this master of words by his contemporaries such as Lata Mangeshkar, Asha Bhosle and Gulzar in the form of a diary interspersed with blank pages for the readers to put down their thoughts. In conversation with poet, author and lawyer Saif Mahmood, she discusses the creation and idea behind the diary and the essence of this personal tribute. Nasreen Munni Kabir is a renowned UK-based documentary filmmaker and the author of 20 books on Hindi film. Her latest publication is In the Year of the Sahir. Her television programs made for Channel 4 TV UK include the series Movie Mahal, In Search of Guru Dutt, Follow That Star-profile of Amitabh Bachchan, and the two-part program The Inner and Outer World of Shah Rukh Khan. She continues to curate Channel 4's annual Indian cinema season. Saif Mahmood writes on Urdu literature and is globally known for his passionate recitations of classical and modern Urdu poets alike. A critic, translator and rights activist, he is the author of the 2018 bestseller Beloved Delhi, A Mughal City and Her Greatest Poets. An advocate of the Supreme Court of India, he holds a doctorate in comparative constitutional law in South Asia. Please do remember to ask questions by typing it into the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present Sahir LUDHIANVI, A Life in Poetry. Nasreen Munni Kabir in conversation with Saif Mahmood. Over to you, Saif.
Adab, Namaskar, and welcome to this session on Sahir LUDHIANVI, one of the most celebrated Urdu poets and film lyricists that we have ever produced. Sahir would have turned 100 on the 8th of March this year, and we are celebrating his centenary. To mark his centenary, Nasreen has curated and conceived this beautiful diary, In the Year of Sahir 2021. Nasreen, when Sahir had published his own collection, Talkhiyan, he began it with a शेर कि दुनिया ने तजुर्बात और हवादिस की शक्ल में जो कुछ मुझे दिया है वो लौटा रहा हूं मैं. In the form of experiments and tragedies, whatever this world has given me, I hereby return with compliments. You know, people, this is the reason that Sahir gave to publish Talkhiyan. Let me ask you this straight away. People write books, they edit anthologies, etc. Why a diary on Sahir? It's a beautiful diary, it's a great idea, but why a diary?
Thank you very much, Saif, and hello, and thank you to JLF. And I'd like to just start off by saying that I want to thank Misam Raza, who allowed me access to his unseen photographs. So there were lots of photographs you've never seen of Sahir Saab, which are in the diary. And there were many, many people who shared their memories and also the experience of working with them. There was also Anwar Abbas Saab, who allowed me to reproduce the English translation by K. Abbas Parchaya and Suhail Akhtar, who very, very, very meticulously wrote out in Urdu the poem. Now, it's a good question, Saif. Why a diary? Now, there's so many biographies on Sahir Saab. There were two in English that I know of, Akshay Manwani and Surinder Dion. And also there are a huge collection of essays and writing on him by Sabir Dutt, which is in Urdu, and many, many other publications. And Sahir himself, his poetry itself is being reproduced consistently. So the only idea behind something like a diary, A, is to mark his 100-year birth centenary, and also to bring together the memories of people who knew him and thoughts of people who appreciate him. And I thought that a diary form marks time. The most important thing about a diary is time. Yes. And some friends have actually complained and said the diary is so nice looking, we don't want to write in it. So my answer, which is a bit cheeky, is I say, look, Sahir Saab has done the writing. You just read.
No, but it's actually an amazing diary, with these hitherto unseen pictures and beautiful small pieces by. And I was just going through the diary. It has K. Abbas, it has B.R. Chopra, even Devanand, and the contemporaries. We have Kausar Munir and Yasir Abbasi and Irshad. All these people. It's absolutely beautiful. So, were you saying something?
No, I was just saying it was quite difficult to do because most of the work was done during lockdown last year. I was in Bombay and I was supposed to go back to London, and there was lockdown. I had the idea of the diary sometime in December. It was in December the year before, and during 2020, I got all this material ready. It was a little difficult because you couldn't go to the person. Thankfully, I had gone to a few people before March of last year, and that allowed me to record their comments. But it was quite difficult to do because everyone was very preoccupied by Corona, and it was not an easy time. And that's why I thought it should be called In the Year of Sahir, and so that we go back to a different time. Time is very important, and we are going through a very tough time all around the world. And so to get some solace and some feeling that, art will be eternal, you go back to somebody's work. And that's why it was quite a challenge, but a rewarding one.
Yes, it's beautiful. In fact, the worst of the times are the best of the times for writers and artists, and you've actually utilized this time in doing an absolutely wonderful job. I must congratulate you on that.
Oh, thank you.
Nasreen, in those days when Sahir was writing for lyrics for films, a lot of other very good lyricists were also writing. I mean, Bollywood, the Indian film industry, Hindi film industry was full of good lyricists. We had people like Janisar, Shakil, even somebody like Majaz tried his hand at lyrics writing. So what was so special about Sahir, which distinguishes him from his contemporaries? एक वो गालिब का शेर है ना कि है और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, कहते हैं कि गालिब का है अंदाज़े बयां और. So what is this or?
Yes, you're absolutely right. His generation of lyricists were the best in Hindi Urdu cinema. And if we look at the contribution of some of the others, so if you see, they have created iconic songs. You take, popular iconic songs. You take Shailendra, no one can beat Mera Joota Hai Japani. It is known all around the world, and in Russia, people even sing that song. And it became like a national anthem. Then you have Majroor Saab, who encapsulated the spirit of Bombay in Ye Hai Bombay Meri Jaan. And then you have Shakil Badayuni, who wrote one of the most romantic songs, which is Chaudhary Ka Chand Ho. So you have people who are like-minded and experts in their own form of expression. But then why does he stand apart? I think because a lot of his songs are about unrequited love. And quite often, when you have love stories, the ones that you remember are the sadder ones. If you meet the girl you fall in love with, and then you marry her, then your problems become different. Pension, where will we live? Where will we retire? What will we do with the children, grandchildren? So your occupations and preoccupations become non-romantic, really, but practical. But if you lose the love of your life, there is always going to be a kind of a frozen time in which romance happens. And many of Sahir Saab's romantic songs start off as being very romantic, but underneath there is a feeling of tragedy, melancholy, rejection, and an almost feeling that not that he doesn't believe in love, but love is something he can never attain.
Mm.
And I also think another thing, when you think about Sahir Saab, is that he writes in a form, and so did the others. Shailendra and Majru Saab also, absolutely true too. He writes in a form where the first line will be very simple, and then he will go into a heavier Urdu and
Yeah.
more philosophical thought. So
Yeah.
that allowed a lot more people to identify with him. Plus, an important thing is that when the writer seems to have an expression of his kind of own life, a kind of an autobiography within his work, he stands out.
Right.
Like today, people think of Guru Dutt. It's because he seemed to be close to the character we see in Pyasa in his real life. And Sahir, in inadvertently maybe, and perhaps because he had already these problems and difficult relationships, has that tinge of autobiography in the songs. Whether people think of Kabhi Kabhi, they immediately link Sahir with somebody, or
Yeah.
Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se, they link again. So, I mean, the minute you have the kind of imaginary life touching the real life, you've got a double whammy.
Yes. So thank you very much for bringing in this perspective about the words used, about his vocabulary, because I really wanted to ask you about his vocabulary. There's this very, very wide canvas on which Sahir writes, because on the one hand, you have Jinhe Naaz Hai Hind Par Wo Kahan Hai, which is actually a simplified version of Sana Khan Tasdeeq Mashriq Kahan Hai. And on the other hand, you have something like Is Jeevan Ki चढ़ती ढलती धूप को किसने बांधा रंग पे किसने पहरे डाले रूप को किसने बांधा so that's which is Hindi Hindustani and pure Urdu so the canvas is very wide. Do you think, Nasreen, that this kind of vocabulary will today be considered as dated?
I don't think dated, but how many people really understand every word, and especially when he's using very high Hindi or high Urdu? I don't think it's dated, but it could be more difficult. But there was a poll that Outlook ran some years ago, and it was about the most popular song, and the result was Manare Tu Kahina Dhirin
Yeah,
Hare. Now, that's a very difficult song.
it
It's a
is.
philosophical
It is.
song, but that turned out to be the popular one. I think the question is that, sometimes you don't understand word by word, but sometimes good work, whether it's Shakespeare or Sahir or other writers, you you get the gist of something.
Yes.
And that very gist is something invisible. And when that hits you, you are moved by it. Now, you take the vocabulary of Abhi Na Jao Chhodkar. It's a very simple thing. But once he gets you hooked, Abhi Na Jao Chhodkar,
Right.
after that, each verse that actually follows gets more and more complex. So he opens the door for you, and you feel you can go in
Hmm.
and you can stay there even if you don't understand everything.
Yes. I was reading the other day, Edward Said has written about Fez. He said, once I met Fez in Beirut when he was in exile, and we sat, there was a Pakistani poet who was visiting, and we sat talking. And after some time, both of them stopped translating Fez's poetry for me, for my benefit, because it didn't matter any longer. I could still understand what they were saying, the gist of it, the spirit, etc. I think it's the same with Sahir. And how much contribution do you think the music made to his to his lyrics?
Absolutely a tremendous amount. You can't divorce the two. Frankly, you can't divorce the two. Majru Saab used to say that Sahir took a long time to write and also was not great on writing on the tune. Majru Saab was famous for being very quick on writing on the
Right.
tune. And Sahir Saab would give the poem or the song to the music composer, and he would go ahead. But also, you have to remember that a lot of the music composers knew Urdu very well. So they knew the impact of words, and they knew musically how to bring it out. Another thing that's good about Sahir and the others of his era was their words were very melodic. They were very phonetically beautiful words, and it lent itself. And we have to say that ultimately, I'm going to ask you about his poetry because that is not my area of knowledge. But in the film song, I would say that he always wrote for the character.
Yeah.
he did not write something that was beyond the character's vocabulary. So in
Yeah.
Pyasa, everybody goes on about Pyasa. In Pyasa, you have the poet singing those songs, but the masser, the Malishwala, will sing Sarjo Tera Chakra.
Yeah.
He is not going to sing Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye.
That's right.
So all his songs were suited to the character. And that is true of the other lyricists too, but Sahir was very good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. But let me ask you this personal question: of all the qualities of Sahir, if you were asked to pick one, why is Sahir so important to you, or why does he endear himself to you? What would your answer be? And what is your favorite Sahir song?
Oh, okay. I think what really, I suppose it's this business of unrequited love.
Hmm.
That is the more that moves you. The
Yeah.
fact that you have the imagination of love and he expresses it so beautifully and simply that you actually are drawn to that. You know, it's like all poetry, whether it's Keats or Byron or I'm sure Ghalib, whenever it's tinged with sadness or philosophical thought, you are drawn to that. And it is true that the other poets have that too, but in different degrees.
Hmm.
And Sahir Saab has been very fortunate that he's got dozens of great songs. Dozens.
Yeah.
The one I like a lot is Ye Raat Ye Chandni Phir Kahan. I think that's beautiful because it's a combination of young Dev Saab,
Yeah.
Guru Dutt, a kind of a stormy, windy night in Goa, and he just creates an atmosphere. And Hemant Kumar's voice, I think, suits Sahir Saab very much because
Yeah.
it's very dreamy. Hemant Kumar, you could hear the river in his voice, and you could hear a dream-like quality. It's a bit ethereal. All the singers, Lata ji, Rafi Saab, Asha ji, Mukesh, all of them understood Urdu, understood what each word meant, and were very in tune to a worldview. You can't sing a song unless you make it your own. And all of these singers had that capacity. And that's just striking.
Yeah.
Plus, the minute you hear a Sahir Saab song, within two lines, you can guess it's Sahir. And
Hmm.
that's voice. And when you have an artist who can come across with his voice, you love it. Now, Saif, I wanted to ask you because I know so little about his poetic work. I know a lot of the like
Yeah.
Khoobsurat More and the Pyasa songs went into film songs, but
Yeah.
he did not write that many collections. So how did he get established as this important Urdu poet?
Well, I think one of the foremost things about Sahir as an Urdu poet is that and actually Akshay Manwani has pointed out uh, this aspect of Sahir in his songs in the introduction to your diary, that he shows society the mirror. So, like all progressive writers, he used to, his concern was not just love and or unrequited love or Jamo Mina or Gulo Bulbul, but he was also writing for, he was talking about social concerns. And the one thing perhaps that that is different about Sahir than all the other Urdu poets who were writing for Bollywood is that here was a man whose mainstream mushaira shairi was as effective as his film lyrics. Because like Majroo Saab, for instance, he was a completely different person when he would write for the mushaira. So tune dar pe rakte chalo saro ke chirag. And then when he would write for films, he would be a completely different person, but not Sahir. Of course, Sahir has written certain things which can't be used in the mushaira, but more often than not, his poetry was his primary concern. Kafi Saab has said that the first time I met Sahir, I met a poet. The last time I met Sahir, I met a poet. I think that is perhaps the USP of Sahir. And secondly, a very important aspect that I wanted to point out about, there's this also what endears Sahir is his very unique take on various things that other poets have also talked about, but not in the kind of words that Sahir is. For instance, I'll give you an example. For instance, about historical monuments, Taj Mahal and Noor Jahan ke Mazar pe, etc. You will find Urdu poetry full of tributes to Taj Mahal, to Noor Jahan, etc. But when he brings in his feminism, and he says, of course, everybody was talking about feminism those days, Majaz and Kafi and Janisar, but Sahir was the only one who said, मैं समझता हूँ तकद्दुस को तमद्दुन का फरेब, तुम रसूमात को ईमान बनाती क्यों हो? I consider chastity a fraud of civilization. Why do you make rituals your faith? I don't want you to make them your faith. So that, somehow touched a chord with people who believe in the progressive writers movement, etc. And I think there's where lies the USP of Sahir as an Urdu poet. Of course, there's much to be said about the language he used, and perhaps you have also pointed out too in your answer. But let me come, because this is your session, Nasreen, and you are really the star here. Let me come back to you and ask.
I'm used to interviewing myself, so that's why.
But let me come back and ask you this question, because actually the same question that you have asked me, but I want to put it differently. Even in his film songs, like Akshay said in his introduction, and I was just mentioning briefly, he has talked about social concerns. चाहे वो ये हो प्यासा का कि जिन्हें नाज है हिंद पर वो कहाँ हैं, या अगर आप धर्मपुत्र में ले लीजिए, he talks, he uses a poem which was used for the war, etc. If today a lyricist would be writing about these things in films, do you think the current day audience would relate to such songs?
We have to actually put Sahir Saab in context of the filmmaking. Yes. In those days, they were tackling themes which today they are not tackling. And there was, you have to say that a film song really has to work with the character and the story. And if you don't have those characters and stories, putting a song that is talking about a different take on the world and a different modern look on the world is going to look like a terribly misplaced work. Yes. So every generation has their own way of articulating. I would say Sahir Saab had a great advantage is because that generation of people, including the audience, knew Urdu. Because a lot of the North and Punjab, as you know, they learned Urdu. So the vocabulary was not alien to them. But if you take B.R. Chopra's work or Yash Chopra's work in Dhul Ka Phool and so on, and Sadhana and these important films, the very theme of the film was different. Pyasa, it was different. And so therefore, you could say that Sahir, where he scored, was not in films like Pyasa, really. Of course, his poetry is brilliant, but because the context helped him. But if you take a film like Manure, you can't sit really through that film, but the song is amazing. Right. So he was fortunate to be able to do the two, show his political point of view, underpinned all his songs. Even Sarjo Tira Chakraye has a political point of view. And the political point of view, even in romance, comes across. So he's always political. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that you can be political, but if you don't have the veneer and the vocabulary and the expression and the mood of a poet, I think you fall flat. And Sahir never did that. Yeah. He always foregrounded poetry. Yes. And poetry was put at the use of politics. It wasn't the other way around. Yes.
And he was a person who, actually believed that change would come. It may not come in my lifetime, but it will certainly come. This commitment to human values, this dreaming for a better tomorrow. Aao ki koi khwab bune kal ke waaste. Warna ye raat is sangeen daur ki das legi jano dil ko aise. So this is what he carried to his lyrics also.
But he also had the opposite, Chino aur Hamara. Yes. So he always saw both sides. Yes. It was the dream quality. Oh yeah, it would be great if only. And also, my God, look what's going on. So that appeals to people because people don't want to just be in the dream world of tomorrow. Yes. That is not enough. Right. That is not enough.
No, that's... So, people often said that Sahir's nazm, Parchhaiyan, that is one single nazm that immediately raised the stature of Sahir as a pure Urdu poet and placed him next to the greatest of Urdu nazm writers. It's created, a position for him which is actually very, very unique. Stands proudly with the best, like Mira Ji and Mustafa Zaidi, etc. At the same time, this is the same person who is also simultaneously writing in films. And this is, if you, I think it's perhaps his magnum opus insofar as Urdu poetry is concerned. And in your diary, there is a beautiful translation of this poem by Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, an anti-war poem, a story, narrated from the point of view, perspective of two war-torn lovers. May I ask you to read the English translation of this poem? I will read the Urdu, and if you could just read some of the
Yes, I
paragraphs.
would be happy to. I was thinking it'd be good if you read the Urdu first and me then.
I will do that.
There's a writer called Ali Hussain Mir who very succinctly described the heart of the poem, and I think I should say that because then people will follow the narrative as we are only showing. I mean, we're only talking about excerpts.
Yes.
He says that Parchaya really is the first person narrative of a protagonist who is watching with dread as the world appears to be lurching towards a third world war. He sees a pair of lovers under a tree, recalls how he and his beloved used to meet at that very spot in the days before the war, destroyed their idyllic lives, and is afraid that these young lovers are heading towards a similar tragic fate. So it is a love story at the same time of being a very, very strongly anti-war poem. And the introduction, Seth, to this original 1955 first edition publication of Parchaya, Sajjad Zahir Saab really said that Sahir has been using the techniques he learned from film. So each verse is cutting between different action spaces, which apparently in poetry was rare. So I would be very happy if you read the Urdu of, you said you might go with the last three verses?
The last three verses, but I would just start with the refrain that comes in the Nazm on and off, and then I will go straight to the last three verses, which are very, very apt for today's India. And I think all of our listeners must listen to what Sahir had to say about the situation which then was. परछाइयाँ तसव्वुरात की परछाइयाँ उभरती हैं कभी गुमान की सूरत कभी यकीन की तरह. And this is the refrain, and then I will go straight to the last three verses. ये सर जमीन है गौतम की और नानक की, इस अर्ज़ पाक पे वहशी न पल सकेंगे कभी. हमारा खून अमानत है नस्ल नौ के लिए, हमारे खून पे लश्कर न पल सकेंगे कभी. तसव्वुरात की परछाइयां उभरती.
So the first line is, shadowy images spring to life from the past. This is the land of Gautam and Gandhi. Never again shall we allow imperialist barbarians on this haloed ground. Our blood is the heritage of the new generation. Never shall we allow this blood to irrigate the fields of war.
Yes, and I'm going to read this again so that now people understand more, because you have translated this beautifully, you read this translation beautifully. सरजमीन ये सरजमीन है गौतम की और नानक की, इस अर्ज़ पाक पे वहशी न पल सकेंगे कभी. हमारा खून अमानत है नस्ल नौ के लिए, हमारे खून पे लश्कर न पल सकेंगे कभी. कहो कि आज भी हम सब अगर खामोश रहे तो इस दमकते हुए खाकदां की खैर नहीं. जुनू की ढाली हुई एटमी बलाओं से जमी की खैर नहीं, आसमां की खैर नहीं.
Speak, for if we remain silent even today, then this glittering, whirling world is in imminent peril. From the horrors unleashed by atomic madness, nothing is safe, neither earth nor sky.
कहो कि आज हम अगर खामोश रहे तो इस दमकते हुए खाकदां की खैर नहीं. जुनू की ढाली हुई एटमी बलाओं से जमी की खैर नहीं, आसमां की खैर नहीं. गुज़िश्ता जंग में घर ही जले मगर इस बार, गुज़िश्ता जंग में घर ही जले मगर इस बार अजब नहीं कि ये तन्हाइयां भी जल जाएं. गुज़िश्ता जंग में पैकर जले मगर इस बार अजब नहीं कि ये परछाइयां भी जल जाएं. तसव्वुरात की परछाइयां उभरती हैं.
In previous wars, only bodies were burnt and bombed and butchered. This time, who knows, even these images, these shadowy memories, may also be reduced to cold atomic dust. and then no shadowy images will ever spring to life again.
That's beautiful. Thank you very
Yes.
much, Nasreen.
It is
We will have some.
Abbas Saab's magic, really. It's a
Yes,
very
it is
difficult.
Abbas magic.
It's a very difficult poem to
Abasa was actually also
translate.
structured it a little differently in his translation, and which
Yes.
makes a lot of sense, that structure. It makes
Yes,
a lot
that's,
of sense,
yeah. He
yeah.
changed the structure, but it works. In the end, many people say, oh, when you translate Urdu, you must know Urdu very well. But I always say you've got to know the target language very well, because
Yes,
it's English that should work, because Urdu Sahir has written it.
yes, yes. The
So
translation should read like a good poem in the language that it is translated
yes,
in.
yes, and also definitely always avoid trying to make rhyme work, because
Yes,
often you impose words which will make a mess of the poem.
yes, that's true. Naseem, we will have some audience questions, but before that, I just want to ask you one more question about Sahir
Yes,
Saab. Um, you know, he wrote on his own terms. This is what people have been saying
yes,
about Sahir. He gave dignity to the lyricist. Perhaps before him, the lyricist was not even properly credited. So tell us
yes.
something about Sahir, the Sahir who wrote on his own terms and completely changed the relationship between a lyricist and the producer or a director.
Actually, the thing is that everybody said he had a very strong personality, and there was no messing around with him. And he even insisted that the radio, Vivid Bharati, announced the name of the lyricist. And this is in the 50s. And before that, they would just talk about the composer and the singer, and then they started talking about the lyricist. But
Yeah.
today, among people who know cinema very well and about who know music very well, Sahir is a household name. I don't think he's that obscure. But what remains is there is also a mystique around him, and there's a kind of, he has an aura, perhaps because he died young, uh, and perhaps because his poetry and his film songs touch so many people. But
Mm.
there is an aura about Sahir today. He is subject of many people's imagination and speculation about his life, and especially about his romances. But I don't think he was rejected as much as that he was not sure how to commit. He
Mm.
always says it's almost like there's something in him that actually doesn't really believe that he can give back love. And I think one of the songs that people don't talk about much in terms of Sahir, but I think is key towards understanding his view of romance, was Jani wo kaise log the jinke
Pyar ke
pyar
pyar.
se pyar mila. Because that is it. Who
Yeah.
are these lucky people who
Yeah.
actually are loved in exchange of love, in return for love? And I
Yeah.
think that is what the problem was, more than Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se. But that's
Yeah.
pure speculation. I don't know.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I have this beautiful piece by you here in this diary that you have written, and it's a very good story about how the word ghazal had to be spelt as Ghazal or Gazal. Please tell us about that.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Basically, there was a film called Ghazal in which he obviously wrote the songs, and the producers apparently just insisted on spelling it as Ghazal, Gazal, and it sounds like the gazelle, the deer. But I mean, isn't it sad that that actually maybe it's a difficult word to pronounce, but I mean, uh, that's the way it is today. Most
Yeah.
people say fir
Fir.
instead of pil.
Yeah. So
Can you imagine the song "Fir Na Kiji Meri Gustakh Nigahi Ka Gila"?
but Sahib refused to do it because the spelling was wrong.
No, no, no. He refused to let his song of Taj Mahal be in the thing. He
I
could. I mean, he wrote
said
for
yes.
Ghazal, the film.
That was Sahir about. That
Yes.
so, yes. So and his stature was such that he could command that kind of
Absolutely. Everybody respected him. They really respected him. Filmmakers. And he was also very fair and good to people who didn't have much in say and voice. He was, a generous man. He was probably a very difficult man, but I don't know many artists who are not difficult. There's something that makes you really rather impatient with life in a way.
yes, yes. Okay, so let's see if we have any audience questions here. We are exactly at 5:35. Uh, um, we are still waiting for those questions to be sent
Okay.
to us. In the
Yes.
meanwhile, we were talking about this very wide canvas of Sahir, and a lot of people in this diary have selected very
Yes.
philosophical or romantic works of Sahir and talked about them. I love what Kausar Munir has selected, and she has said,
Yes.
for most lyricists, just being able to deliver a fun, cool song without slipping into lazy phrases or class imagery is a tough enough task. And that is what Sahir has achieved with Malish, Tel Malish, Dil Ko Chera Tera Chakraye. So
Yes.
the questions started coming in.
Yes. Uh,
Bhavani,
Sorry. What did you say? Yeah.
Bhavani asks Nasreen ji, if someone was to really understand Sahir Saab as a person, what book would you recommend? And the second question is, which song describes Sahir best as a person?
That's. I think it's जाने वो कैसे लोग थे जिनके,
जाने वो
because
कैसे
they, because it's very romantic, but it is also a feeling that love is not possible, not doable. I would say that more than Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se. Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se was much more to do with protecting the girl's uh, difficulty in dealing with him. How would she relate to him? And the some of the other songs are really not the same thing. But in terms of how do you understand him? I mean, you in terms of the information. Who asked the question, Bhavani?
Bhavan.
Bhavan. Bhavan, in terms of understanding Sahir, I think obviously the biographies give you the biographical sketch. But to be honest, I always feel an artist can be discerned in his work. And if you read his poems and if you read his songs, you can piece together his thinking. And I think that there is nothing better than that. Because whatever I say or Saif says or X says, it's speculation. I never met Sahir Saab. I never knew him well. So how do I really know? I can just be in admiration of his work. I can't assume to be his knowledgeable about him. I
The
think
first question.
one was very good was Javed Saab. Javed Saab was very close to him, and he gave me a little detail which I thought was beautiful detail, which I had never read about Sahir before. And he said when Sahir was a bit troubled, he would stand in front of the mirror and keep combing his hair. Now I thought that was an amazing little insight because it gave you a picture of a man who was ultimately lost in thought but needed to do something, and he would comb his hair. Now, something like that only few people would know, and Javed Saab
Yeah.
was witness to this.
Bhavani's first question was, what book would you recommend to understand Sahir as a person?
I would say biographies, any of the biographies. If you know Urdu, if you read Urdu, Sabir Dutt has many interviews with Sahir himself. I think always I like from the horse's mouth. I like first-hand information. So Sahir himself gives interviews in Urdu, which you can read in Sabir Dutt's thing. And I think they're quite telling.
If I'm allowed to take the liberty to answer this question, my personal favorite is Akshay Manwani's book on
But it's
Sahir.
biographical.
Biographic, yes. It's a
You know,
beautiful
it is not
biography,
from
very
Sahir.
well researched.
Yeah, it's very good, but it is from, it is not Sahir speaking.
That's right, yes. So Jessica has a question, Nasreen. Jessica is asking you, how differently do you look at Urdu because of Sahir Sahab, and what new aspects of the language did he bring out or introduce to you? Did
Me,
the language become
that's,
sweeter thanks to him?
yes, that's a lovely question, Jessica.
Yeah.
I love that question. I would say that the song that intrigued me and I learned from it was the structure of Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se. First of all, he says na main, then he says na tum in the second line, then he says na mere, na tumhari, then he goes into you, me, you. It's like a ping pong between the two. And I thought that was an amazing structure. And at the last, he changes the whole thing and becomes Taruf Rog and Taluk Boj. And I think that Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se, it's intriguing of the structure of how he wrote that song. So to me, I learned a lot. And I asked this friend of mine, Suhail Akhtar, about this. And he said this was very much part of what Persian writers do. Persian poets often have na tum and na main, and he probably was inspired from that structure. So I learned something about Urdu from Sahir Saab from this song.
I see. Okay, thank you very much for that answer. We have a couple of more questions, and we have 5 minutes. So, there's a question by Akanksha. Amrita Pritam's love for Sahir Ludhianvi is well known. What were the views of Sahir Ludhianvi on the works and life of Amrita ji, if there were any?
To be honest, there's a lot written about it. And in Akshi's book, there is a lot about it. And in various places, there's a lot about it. And Amrita Pritam herself has written about it. More than that, did not find anything new information, to be
No, I
honest.
think her question is,
Yeah.
has Sahir Ludhianvi commented on Amrita Pritam's works?
That I don't know. I haven't read anything on it. Do you know, Saif, if she...
No, I
if he
don't.
did?
I don't.
I
know.
don't believe so. I
No,
don't think he didn't look
Except
like
that,
someone...
except that Salman Akhtar
Yes.
believes that this share of Sahir is on Amrita, कि वो चंद कलियां निशात की चुनकर मुद्दतों महवे यास रहता हूँ तेरा मिलना खुशी की बात सही तुझसे मिलकर उदास रहता हूँ. According to Salman Akhtar, this share,
Yes.
and yes, he thinks there's a whole history behind it, etc., which he has actually written about.
It could be, because really in the end, the people you meet get into your work.
Yeah. Mekla asks a question. Her question is, contemporary popular music is often criticized for having commercially trivial lyrics. Will revisiting lyrics such as Sahir's be helpful in improving the current quality of Bollywood music?
I would say that many of the lyricists today regard Sahir very highly. They also know they cannot write that type of lyric in today's stories. It just does not fit. And if you look at many of the films today, I fear that the song is becoming redundant. Filmmakers don't really integrate it terribly well, and there's no real space or situation. And, the romantic love poems, Abhi Na Jao Chhodkar, all these songs will not fit in today's films. I don't understand where. I mean, if you have Tiger Zinda Hai, would he be singing Abhi Na Jao Chhodkar? Or, Salman would be singing, or Amir? I don't think so. It is, you see, some poets, their work is very much of their time, and that is why we also appreciate them.
The last question for today. This is a question from Suman. You mentioned Kaifiji's meeting with Sahir, which made me think, are there any poets or lyricists that Sahir looked up to?
As far as I could tell, I think he was friends with a lot of them. Faiz.
Yes.
Definitely Faiz. But I don't know. I never read anything that he was in great admiration of. I'm sure most of them were in admiration of Ghalib. I'm sure of that. But I don't remember.
Iqbal, actually, a lot of the Punjabi
Iqbal?
poets, yes. And,
but that is another important thing to remember, is that Sahir was Punjabi and spoke Punjabi was his mother tongue, and yet look at the mastery of Urdu. So that's why I said that era, a lot of the people in Punjab and in the North India spoke and wrote Urdu. Even today, Gulzar Saab writes in Urdu. Javed Saab writes in Urdu. So that generation had it as an everyday lived language.
Actually, some of the greatest of Urdu poets have been Punjabis, including Allama Iqbal and Faiz, both of them.
Punjabis.
So, yes, we are running out of time now, and this was the last session. So thank you very much, Nasreen, for being here today, for talking to us, and thank you for this wonderful gift that you have given to us in 2021. Sahir साहब ने कहा था कि कल और आएंगे नगमों की खिलती कलियां चुनने वाले, मुझसे बेहतर कहने वाले, तुमसे बेहतर सुनने वाले. मुझे तो नहीं लगता है कि उनसे बेहतर कहने वाला है कोई आया है उनके बाद, बट आपने उनके कामों को इसमें मुजस्सम करके बहुत बड़ा एहसान किया उनके सब एडमायरर्स पे. थैंक यू वेरी वेरी मच नसरीन, एंड थैंक यू ऑल फॉर लिसनिंग टू अस, फॉर ट्यूनिंग इन. थैंक यू जय.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen and Saif, for allowing us to be a part of this tribute to one of our greatest lyricist poet. Thank you to our celebration partner Diageo, and to all of you for being such a supportive audience. Please do stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that we have specially curated for you. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been critically impacted by the pandemic, and while we have braced ourselves to embrace the new normal, we have struggled to ensure that we continue to bring to you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. We would be grateful for your support towards Teamwork Arts. Any contribution is welcome. Please do also remember to tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 and tag us at Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. We hope to see you in our other sessions.